During the golden age of record buying, the B-side or flip side of a 45-inch single was a mystery that the music fan would only discover when they played it. Sometimes it was a disappointment, but other times it'd be a surprising discovery. That's why time travelers from a future where most historical records have been lost refer to the pre-time travel era as the flip side. Time travel is a dangerous business, not only for what effects changes in the past might affect. Welcome back to Very British Futures. Today we're taking a look at one of Play for Today's most fondly remembered installments, the 1980s sci-fi rom-com The Flipside of Dominick Hide, and its sequel, Another Flip for Dominick. There will be spoilers ahead for both plays. Putting on their saucer-shaped hats to join me are Tim Reid and Charles Auchterlonie, hosts of the Doctor Who-centric podcast The Randomiser, who you may remember hearing enduring Kinvig in an earlier episode. So, welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for welcoming us back.
Have you learned nothing from last time? This is the question.
In 1953, the Gibsons were having a family party when the flying saucer craze came up in conversation. 15-year-old Alan intrigued his relatives with his theory that these mysterious objects were not spy planes or from outer space, but in fact were time machines from the future. Alan Gibson's idea stayed with him as he grew up to become a respected film and television director, and in the 70s he eventually wrote it down as a treatment. After 4 years of submitting it to various companies, Gibson received an enthusiastic response from Keith Williams, newly installed head of plays at the BBC. Now needing to turn his outline into a full script, he approached Jeremy Paul to co-write, having admired his work when he directed it years before. Jeremy agreed, despite his reservations that science fiction was a genre he had little interest in. Unsurprisingly, Alan Gibson also directed. The play was first broadcast on BBC One on the 9th of December 1980, receiving an enthusiastic response from both the audience and critics. The Radio Times letter editor claimed that no other single new BBC TV play in 1980 attracted so much correspondence. So before we go any further, Tim, would you like to tell us more about the plot of The Flipside of Dominick Hide?
I'd love to, thank you. But first, I've got to say, yes, there are bloody islands.
What about unicorns?
Okay, so it's a long time ago. It's a London far, far away. So this is episode 1, The Firth Awakens. It's 2130. The world is technologically advanced, affluent, and dull as hell. It's the sort of place where the idea of a good time is to send somebody back in time to monitor the movements of 20th century buses. So no wonder Dominick Hide, played by Peter Firth, is bored. Life seems pleasant, but lacking in passion and excitement. So this temptation to land his time-traveling saucer and plunge into the vibrant past, buses notwithstanding, is too much for Dominick, and he lands in search of an ancestor. So this ancestor, also known as Dominick Hide, was believed to live in this time by his great-auntie Mavis, who's played by Celia Coleridge. She's an aficionado of the past and has memories of the world from the before times. This sort of landing, though, is strictly forbidden by the authorities in the future, and there are dire stories of history being changed by travellers landing and getting involved. So Dominick's odd futuristic ways and his weird hat, these are read by the people of the past as being some sort of priest or monk, and perhaps that explains why everyone's so helpful and he isn't dead in the ditch within half an hour of landing. But among the friendly Londoners that he meets are Jane, who's played by Caroline Langrish, and she helps him look for his ancestor under his cover story of Dominick being a long-lost relative. It's kind of true, actually. But they become lovers and Jane becomes pregnant. So when Dominic confesses this to his boss Caleb, who's played by Patrick McNee.
Hello, this is Gareth from the future, just dropping in to say that of course we know that Caleb Line was played by the marvellous Patrick McGee.
It turns out to have all been a cunning plan orchestrated by Caleb. The child is the long-lost ancestor, and Dominic has had to land to become his own great, not sure how many greats, grandfather. But Dominic's journeys to the past, they've reawakened his joy in living, and he brings this new vigour back to the future, as it were, telling his wife Ava about his relationship with Jane and sharing other joys from the vivid past, and their relationship is reinvigorated. Dominic's also finally honest with Jane about who he is or when he's from, and he provides for her and the child with the old future pools results scam, time travellers, eh? Well, the film ends with a lovely shot of Jane and baby Dominic at the seaside before the camera turns around for us to see Dominic and his wife Ava and a son on the same beach in the future, laughing happily.
Beautifully done there. So, I think I'm going to turn to you, Charles, first. And overall, what did you make of the first play?
I loved it. I remember watching it on original broadcast. I was a sci-fi geek anyway, and so I sort of hoovered up anything like this. But I suppose that considering when it went out, I was probably a bit young for it, but I sort of really enjoyed it. I particularly remember the fact that the saucer landing in a sort of a derelict sort of builder's bit or something, and there's a couple having it off when it lands, and she says, "Oh, I saw stars," or something. He goes, "Oh, not yet, baby," or something. So nice and funny. But the plot's great. Actually, it's sort of, it's complicated, but it's not fed to you in a complicated way. It's quite easy to sort of, to get your head around it. Performances are great. My favourite goes to Patrick McNee, though, because, he's just so funny. I loved him in the likes of A Clockwork Orange and stuff, and he's got this delivery of, "All right," very arch. And he's just hilarious. But Peter Firth is wonderful as Dominic. Supporting cast are very good. Some nice little funny bits. Every time he sees a dog, or is that a cat? I'm trying to remember now.
It's a dog.
It's a dog. Yeah.
Right. He's backing off a little, and there's a really good bit in a restaurant where they have a bit of an argument or something, and he walks out and he walks directly into the musician that's sitting playing because he thinks it's a hologram and stuff. So nice little touches there. Although I agree with Tim, the future is boring as hell because all we ever seem to watch is a Renaissance fair or something.
Well, clearly the Beatles are still coining in the royalties in the future.
Yeah, probably. But it's you sit and watch and think, God Almighty, have you invented something more entertaining? But maybe the secret holodeck or something.
In the sequel, Sue does offer him porn, I think, at one point.
Oh yes, Sue.
We'll have to go into that.
Sue's actually voiced by Alpha Centauri.
Anne Churchman.
Yeah. But she's, funny enough, on IMDb, she's not got it in her credits, but if you go to the Flipside of Dominick Hide, it's in there, and it lists her.
Sue's basically Siri, isn't she?
Well, their version of Siri, or the A word.
Which you daren't say.
I don't know who's got one. It might set off.
Yeah, so I was going to mention Siri, but then I thought computers with female voices have been with us for, Star Trek and probably before then.
And it was unusual for the time because Play for Today, you occasionally got more light ones, but it was quite dark and gritty. I often thought for a long time that the Dominick Hide ones were part of the Play for Tomorrow series, but that was a completely sort of separate thing because you had Zeth as like a Raya and stuff.
Yeah, I think that the Play for Tomorrow was a spin-off from the success of the Dominic Hyde plays. They thought, oh, well, there's an audience for this. And we might well be looking at those in a future podcast. And I'm glad you picked up on probably my favourite joke, because it's so well set up, is that one involving the guitarist at the restaurant, because near the start you see this bit where he's walking through the hologram of the musicians in his futuristic house, and your mind thinks, "Oh, that's clever. That's a neat bit of we're in the future sort of visual storytelling," and then it pays off beautifully.
Yeah, because it's quite subtle as well. It's sort of some of Peter Firth plays it very subtly in a lot of ways. I mean, he's very much, fish out of water, but there's just some little gentle bits of comedy like that are just really nice.
Yeah, so I was surprised to hear you describe it as a rom-com, but it does have those out-and-out comic moments and little touches elsewhere. I think the fish out of water comedy comes quite naturally to it. But yeah, that's definitely a standout moment. And I think there's a sort of gentler humor throughout in terms of how he just makes mistakes and charms his way through the odd past London that he finds himself in.
I think charm is one of the sort of like major keywords of both plays. Allow him to get away with a lot. I'm curious, Tim, your sort of general feelings watching the. Had you seen them before?
I hadn't. But they're one of many pieces of sort of old TV that lots of different people in my kind of in my life have recommended over the years, and so it's been always one that people have talked about and been on the must watch someday list. So it's lovely to have a kind of impetus to actually finally get down to watching it, and I was thoroughly glad I did. They're just great, both plays, and I think it's really interesting to look at the kind of morality of Dominic, and I might take a slightly different line to some, I think, because I find that he is, generally speaking, he's a very truthful character, and so his kind of seeing a woman in the past, he I don't know if it's immediately, but certainly he goes back and reports this to his wife in the future, Ava, and is honest with her and open about his experiences, both with meeting Jane, but also with kind of just the joy that it's giving him. And that's a really strong theme in the program, I think, as well, the kind of reawakening. So my Firth Awakens joke was kind of quite deliberate in terms of you see this character who's just hungry for more in life and finds it in many ways in the past, but also wants to share it. I think that's another part of his charm, is he's not just sneaking off and having a seedy affair. He's also kind of actually trying to reinvigorate his life with Ava. And there is sex in the program, and there's kind of very almost formalized sex that they have as a couple in the future before he goes back to the past. And then when he comes back, it's a lot more kind of wild and passionate, and he brings a lot of that with him. I think there's also other things like the rose that he brings back, which they have to keep locked in a box. It's fragile. I think a metaphor there about the dangers of the passions of the past getting out of the box as well.
I find it also quite refreshing that people's seem to have loosened up a bit as well in the future about moralizing about the things that worry us. Like you say, the honesty is very refreshing, because even in the second one, he's asked about by the woman in the past if he's told his wife and all that, and yes, he has. It's like you say, it's very much he's very open with it as well. So yeah, it's good. I also found it quite interesting because the way they talk, there's certain words that are used that are very old-fashioned. Like, for example, Sue says about the peelers,
Yes.
at one point, and I'm thinking, that's a bit strange. But also, his wife basically is a tour operator for Thomas Cook.
Product placement's alive and well. It's Tom Cook.
But the way it's all done, it makes it sound like she's in Tom Cook and, you know, she's in this very highfalutin thing. And when I sat and listened to it for about 5 minutes, I thought, she's a tour operator. She works for Thomas Cook. It's nothing special, you know, but it's quite funny the way it's sort of, it's all laid out in that.
There's a lot of good world building, isn't there? And they kind of, you get the sense that the past has been lost and fragments remain. And Great Aunt Mavis is kind of one of the characters that drives a lot of that interest in the past, I think.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of quite subtle word. I mean, I'm very glad, for example, they don't explicitly say what the big disaster is that happened between 1980 and Dominick's future. They're just ambiguous quite what has happened.
I actually, when I was watching that and they were mentioning the disaster, the only thing going through my head was David Mitchell going, "Don't mention the event." You know, his Mitchell and Webb, that the sort of occasional comedy sketch about the quiz programme.
Remain indoors.
The event. But yeah, it's they are very subtle about it, and it's nice because really and truly it's not anything that's necessary to the plot, and they keep the plot quite free of unnecessary faff.
Actually, I think it would be a very good plot for a musical. I think it's that right level of complexity.
It definitely have to be a prog rock, though.
What rhymes with saucer?
Interestingly, apparently they were approached at one point. Somebody who was sorry, I've forgotten his name off the top of my head. This is covered in Andrew Pix's notes, that the writers were approached by someone who was a fan, and they had this idea that he was going to write sort of an operetta that would cover and in the 80s it would be an operetta, and then in the future somebody else would do some techno-futuristic music for those sections, but nothing came of it.
It's rather nice, the little snippets you get, and his maiden aunt is a great character, you know, in both stories, you know, is sort of filling in blanks, but you know, you're not getting necessarily the whole story, so it makes it compelling to find out. Well, I suppose if you look at it from the way we view TV now, it seems pretty obvious that Dominick is going to be his own, you know, great however many grandfather, because we're used to that. But back then, I think that was quite a novel approach. And I certainly, at the time, didn't guess, you know, so it was quite a nice surprise. And quite a clever one as well. It sort of
It probably seemed fresher to a more mainstream audience. Probably we're still in the free channel era when this went out, so it would have naturally have had. It wouldn't have just have been sci-fi fans tuning in. They would a bigger audience. So, and I think it keeps the science fiction at the right level. Yeah, even though they've got even the kind of the made-up language of the future, it's that's the kind of thing that might appeal actually on an intellectual kind of sense of humour, because they can recognise names of London districts and the like.
Yeah, very, very, very clever, and also it was just at Play for Today as well. It was such a staple of the British diet at that point, so it was nice to spit in a bit of science fiction.
I was going to ask if you'd seen it on broadcast.
I hadn't seen it on broadcast, and I don't know why, because I was certainly around and interested in science fiction. It's possible I might have said, "Oh, it looks a bit people kissing," and so that's why I didn't watch it. So, well, like you, Tim, it was one of those things that was mentioned in magazines and the like, but I didn't actually catch up with it until I'm thinking probably the late 90s, when I was, you know, generally trying to watch all the kind of classic series.
The good old VHS days.
Yes.
I had a few sort of scattershot observations about the first play.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lovely quote from Caleb: if you wish to study people, watch old films. I think he says that to Dominic when Dominic's expressing his enthusiasm about people in the past. We've got Dennis Lawson as the raging economist.
I was going to say it scores quite high on the before they were famous.
Yes.
The meter.
Before they were in Star Wars. I don't know. Maybe that was post Star Wars, actually. Was it 1980?
It was post Star Wars for him.
Yeah.
Although maybe he just recorded his bit for Empire Strikes Back at that point. Plus, we have that gentleman you mentioned with his girlfriend when the flying saucer lands, Carl Homan.
Where did he go on to?
Who would go on to Brushstrokes. That was it. Famous sitcom.
I did think Peter Firth looked very like Colin Baker, sort of facially and with the hair.
There is a moment, especially near the front, near the start of the play, because when he goes into the future, there is a kind of effect around his face that like a sort of ersatz Doctor Who.
You can hear Dominic Glynn's music coming in. I did think that all these accusations that Dominic's working for MI5, it means this is clearly in the Spooks universe, this play. Because, of course, that's probably what he's most famous for latterly, Peter Firth, isn't it?
I think, yeah, that's it. I think at the time he was probably best known. I think he had done Equus. That was kind of his big calling card.
Yeah.
But, he was still, at this point, he's an exciting young actor. In fact, it's one of the, again, going back to Andrew Pixley's notes, the reason that there was like a 2-year gap between the plays is that he wanted to go to Hollywood, basically, and get his green card. So that's one of the reasons there was a gap between the two plays. And he's very good, and apparently, as well as the he brought a lot, he had a lot of suggestions which seem to have been enthusiastically received by Paul and Gibson. Because if you say it has suggestions, that might sound like they're going to be really annoying. But I gather this was not the case in this one. And he's very good. Like I said, charm is a key note of it. But he doesn't overplay. He doesn't overplay anything, really, because there's a way of doing that character that could go very wrong. He could go very syrupy, this kind of child, or he could have been a sort of annoying Mr. Bean, sort of misunderstanding everything, and that's something else. I think they get it at the right level. So we have this whole scene with him trying to make coffee, instant coffee, and
yes,
a big hash of it.
But I think if they'd had comedy in their mind, that might have come out worse. Whereas I get the impression that they're just telling a story fairly straight, and the comic moments arise out of the situations rather than, hey, let's do a funny bit of business now.
Yeah, definitely. It rises out of the character. A good example is when he brings that coffee to Jane, and she's having a bath.
Oh yes,
which doesn't bother him, because in the future everyone seems to be very calm about nudity, sort of like around the house. But and she takes it fairly well. Actually, she's a very understanding woman in this one, and so he just kind of. But the way he plays it, I suppose, because he doesn't come in and he's not at all creepy about it. He's just really matter of fact and gives her this terrible cup of coffee and just kind of wanders off again. So that's a funny scene.
The coffee's sort of the punchline to the scene when she kind of goes, it's like, I think there is that just, and again, you say it's not overplayed as kind of complete, sort of naivety, but he's just earnest and sincere and interested in things. And I think that's what makes Jane notice him as well. He's obviously unusual, but he's also just kind of, a kind of man who's alive with the possibilities of the world he finds himself in. And I think that may be what attracts Jane to him at first.
I think also he seems safe. He's not, like you said, when he goes in with the coffee, he's not creepy. He's just matter of fact, and it's refreshing considering it's the 80s, when attitudes and stuff, and his is, enlightened, but also just sort of totally cool with things. and that would probably be like a breath of fresh air.
By the standard of romances on TV, I can believe it. It seems to, it doesn't feel like it's a contrived romance that has to happen because plot. It sort of, it does feel like it arises naturally.
Although technically it is a predestination paradox.
Well, they sort of look that in the face a little bit in the second one, I think.
Also, the hat is exactly the same saucer shape, which is quite amusing. But
I'm quite ashamed how long it took me to notice that as well.
But also, it's for UV rays and things, so that's quite clever. The suit looks quite it looks very neat and tidy, and it's got a sort of decent futuristic look to it. Because the problem with, especially if you go back to 70s and 80s, their vision of people in the future, everybody was wearing bloody silver suits and Ray-Bans or something.
Well, let's face it, Dominic couldn't have worn anything more outlandish than what you would have seen on Top of the Pops that week anyway.
But it is interesting that the hat sort of takes off. It sort of, when he comes out, you see people wearing these hats. So I found that quite cute, actually. But it's minimal. Again, it's minimal. They're not overstating things too much, and I like that. But one thing I noticed was that when he's at home, I'm trying to remember if it's the first or the second one, but he's got this sort of gold hugging like tank, sleeveless vest on. And he honestly looks as if he's about to go out clubbing at Heaven or something. It's like I'm sitting watching it going, yep. But it's really good. I think props to the costume designer on that. They came up with a look that's very recognisable as well. People, if you mention that to someone, that look, generally, I mean, I'm talking sort of terms of sci-fi people, but people will remember Dominick Hide and they'll remember the hat and things. It's something that will stick in the mind.
Yeah, I think credit to the costume designer was Rosalind Ebbott. And I think she deserves, because there's lots of, especially BBC sci-fi shows, where the future just looks ghastly. They just sort of, we've all lost our sense of taste whatsoever. And I think it's a credit, that Dominick's future looks, on the BBC budget, it looks reasonably solid and stylish and somewhere you'd like to live.
Yeah, I mean, this could be a reason why a lot of BBC sci-fi future productions, it's a sort of doom-laden future, like Triffids or Survivors, where everybody's just grabbing what they can, so they don't have to make it look too futuristic. They can basically get away with, putting them in a sheepskin coat or something, because that was the first thing we could grab.
Are we claiming that the trend for dystopian future sci-fi is entirely based on the ease of costume design?
Absolutely. I stand by that.
That's it. There's only two ways. It's the sheepskin or it's the leather straps.
Oh dear. There's something to take out of context.
Thinking about the two lead actresses involved. We've already raved about Sylvia Coleridge, who's always brilliant in whatever she does. Any thoughts on Carol Lancashire as Jade or Pippa Gard as Ava?
Ava's very I don't know, she's like Dominic at the start, as Tim said, it's very by the numbers. Everything is just, safe and a little bit, predictable. And as Tim pointed out, you know, she's enthused by the end, but it's a very good performance. She's very subtle again with a lot of her little things, you know, sort of when she's looking at the rose, or, you know, and he obviously mentions Jane. And although she's not put out per se, you can see she's slightly worried about it, but I think she sort of, you know, has a think and she's okay, but she's definitely noticed that he's invigorated more, and that sort of brings her more out of her shell.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good performance with material that could be hard to tread in terms of, first of all, just that difficulty in playing a kind of placid, tranquil future. It always has the danger of slipping into just being a bit dull, but that's avoided quite well, I think. And I think there's also a subtle detail of it's. If I'm reading the clues rightly, they seem to be assigned their partners kind of centrally by the government or computer or whatever. And there's talk of oh, maybe we're not compatible, or we could change and things like that. And they have a friend in the first play, of course, who does just that, doesn't he? And so I think that character's there to sort of illustrate the kind of way that romantic love is set up in the future as well. So, but no, I do think Pippa Gard has the hardest job of the leads to do in terms of charting that character. And I do like very much that they largely avoid the obvious jealousy kind of trope, and there's a little more of that in the second one with good reason, and we'll come to that. But but likewise, Ava gets a lot more kind of development and autonomy in the second one, whereas I do think it's you know, she was the character most at risk of being kind of two-dimensional, and it's really a testament to the actor that they've managed to kind of embody her journey in the reflection of Dominick's journey.
That's a good point you make, actually, about being assigned their partners, as it were. It sort of got me thinking, because recently I watched Rollerball, film, and they, in that future, they're assigned partners. Like, you know, the he's with gets reassigned. His wife got reassigned at one point. He's with a different partner now. So it's not something I'd thought about, but maybe it is a thing that's explored more in sci-fi, you know?
I think there's always been kind of, you know, various kind of takes on how sexual relationships will work in the future, with more or less a level of kind of sleaze and schlockiness depending on the production. And, you know, you've got your, but that kind of idea of assigned, you know, computer generated control it exists in a bigger form in other works, and in this one it's quite underplayed. I think it's kind of just a subtle detail, really, and nobody seems to feel particularly oppressed by that or unhappy with that in the future. I think it's not something they're pushing against.
And Carol Langrish is splendid as a character worth travelling across time and breaking some rules to have a romance with. But at the same time, she's real, because there's a chance she could have turned into a bit of a sort of fantasy girlfriend to some extent. She keeps on the right side of believability, and the scene where she's hurt towards the end, she sort of realizes who Dominick really is and what's been going on. They're very well played scenes.
Absolutely. She's, like you say, she's very, very real. She's very good fun, but, you know, she's not like airhead or fantasy fun. You know, she's sort of like the scene in the pub where she sort of invites them along, you know, and it feels like the sort of times I've been out with friends in a pub. There's, you know, nothing feels out of place apart from Dominick, but even then he's welcomed into the group and the dynamic that goes on with all the friends. It's rather wonderful, and as I say, she's particularly sort of engaging character.
Sorry, I think she's great. My memories are fresher of the second play, which I watched more recently, obviously, and I think there's some great development there. But no, just again, a potentially tricky role to navigate, but I think it's written with a decent believability of the kind of step-by-step journey from who is this weird guy to hang on, this weird guy says he's from the future sort of thing.
Yeah, you mentioned about the friends and the pub. One thing that did, and I think it was you, Tim, hinted at this a little earlier on. It's just how friendly London is in a way that I don't believe the real 1980s London was. It would be nice to think it was, in that it's like everyone's really happy to help.
I wonder if it's because they're reading him as a priest or a monk, because of the hat and the costume. I mean, I'd like to think in the modern London that he'd be dead in a ditch like anybody else, because those guys have had a free pass for too long. But we've moved on as a society. But I do think it's that thing that crops up in a few places of that kind of, you can be as eccentric as you like as long as you're of a religious order. In fact, they even play on that in the second one, of course, in the.
That's it. But I do kind of like that scene at I think it's Camden Market, where he meets Jane's friend. Who I can't think what his
maybe
name.
His boyfriend, maybe not.
Yeah, a sort of a could have been Jim, I think his name is.
Yeah,
I'm going to call him Jim. Yeah.
Let's call him Jim.
So there we are, where he meets Jim, and that nice scene, and Jim starts, "All right, you mate, we've got this bloke here. He's looking for his long lost brother." He doesn't actually see that. He sounds a lot better than that.
Yeah, no, it gives you hope for the past, doesn't it?
I think because Dominic is so charming, he really he has a way of putting people at ease. I mean, like when he says, "I have no peas," and stuff like that. And, it's his cleverness as well. He's quite quick thinking about things, making up Gilby, or again, a bit in the second one where he sees a busker and he works out how to get peas and things. So,
with this magic ring.
Yeah, man, I know. That's his sonic screwdriver.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's his charm and his likability, and he does have a way of sort of just, he seems to talk to someone for a few minutes and puts them at complete ease. It's not false. He's not trying to con anyone. He's basically just, he's real and he's genuine, and it's quite a refreshing thing to see on screen sometimes.
It's his charm, because on one level, Dominic behaves, even though he's driven, he seems to be driven by a kind of innocent passion, but there's a way of reading him. He's quite a selfish character. He sort of just kind of goes over after what he wants without too much thinking about the consequences of it. And in some ways, certainly in this first play, he seems to manage to have his cake and eat it. And it turns out even his infidelity was all part of a great plan, and he gets a pat on the back for it.
I think that's where the honesty comes in terms of the interpersonal relationships. He's not that. I mean, to leap ahead a bit, the key moment in the second play is when he lies to Eva, and the whole thing twists on that moment.
That's a really good. That's a really good point. I hadn't really thought. Yeah.
I mean, Caleb's machinations are a kind of layer above everything else. So it feels like, I don't think it's a weakness necessarily, but they do feel kind of, there's nothing inexplicable until Caleb waves his magic wand at the end, and it's all kind of tidied up. But then I think that's a lovely conclusion to it all. And when you're not familiar with the grandfather paradox already, I think that must have been a kind of delightful kind of surprise for a lot of viewers at the time.
But that's what makes the first story, like say, Dominic's travels into the past and so on. I mean, that's very dangerous, because obviously they're all trained. They all know that, you can affect the future and the past. So by him doing that, which is strictly forbidden, that is quite dangerous. But he gets away with it, so he keeps doing it. But as you say, there's Caleb already had this. He knew what was happening. But you would hope that when if someone just done that, they would notice straight away. But next one, well,
that's the kind of benevolent totalitarianism in the end. But
yeah,
I think one thing I wanted to clear up with you both was the rules of the time travel, because I got a little confused, and it comes into play in the second one again. So am I right in thinking that if you don't return to the future, then somehow you disappear from the future, even before you left, or the effects of your life in the future are somehow unraveled?
I think you got the right handle on it there, Tim. That's kind of what happens. It's rather than just you change time, but yeah, I'm thinking it isn't more that sense of
personal threat that represents, but then there's the kind of bigger existential threat, the story of the previous time traveler who did something nasty to a dog and caused untold damage in the future.
See, that confused me ever so slightly, because, like, again, in the second one, which we will get into, but the guy that's the trainee, as it were, that's in the past, son, is fading.
That was it. Yeah, that was the part.
I thought to myself, well, logically, you would think that he had a son in the future, but then he goes back into the past. But he's at the age, he's an older person. Mm-hmm. He's already had his son, so why would that affect that?
That was exactly
it. And my head exploded.
Yeah, that was exactly the part I got a bit muddled about. So it seemed like there was some more kind of fundamental undoing of your future life if you didn't go back to your proper place in time.
I suppose time travel is just one of those things you can sort of make it up on the hoof, really, whatever. Whatever the rule is.
Yeah, you're on pretty safe ground, unlike some physical laws. Yeah, no one's going to can seriously challenge you, really.
There's a strongly worded letter from Stephen Hawking in the post.
Yes, and before we leave the first play, I think we need to talk a little bit about Meal Ticket, which is the
the song,
the theme song of Dominick.
My little outburst earlier was basically in response to the fact that you continually get the first verse of that, and there was a point in the second one where I was just like, I've had enough. And weirdly enough, after that point in the play, I think the producers were sharing my fear because they changed it to the other song. But it's fine. It's delightful. It's just extraordinarily overused.
I think it's just one of those sort of 70s, 80s ballads, isn't it? That sort of it's inoffensive unless you're Tim, who takes offence to everything.
Especially musically. You know where it sits for me? It sits right next to the odd choice of theme tune for Star Cops with that Justin Hayward band.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most bizarre.
I mean, I grew to love it, but at first you're like, it's just playing completely against any kind of zingy synthesizer-based sci-fi music.
Because of the play's enormous success, the BBC considered making a Dominick Hide series, as they had for the Play for Today production Gangsters. But Gibson and Paul resisted the idea, fearing that the concept would become stale and be a cheap-looking studio-bound production. Nevertheless, they were as keen as the BBC to create a sequel, and once all the cast were available, another flip for Dominick went into production.
Several years later, Dominick has retired from active service and accepted a promotion to become a tutor to younger correlators. But whilst enjoying Christmas morning with his family, he is summoned by Caleb to go to 1982 and discover what has happened to one of his protégés, Pyrus Bonington, who has gone missing. Despite his wife's Ava's misgivings, he can't resist getting in touch with Jane as soon as he lands, ostensibly for her help, but really just to see her and his infant son. Jane reveals that her jackpot pools win never happened because Dominick got his dates wrong, but she's in a contented relationship with a rock guitarist who has just departed on a 6-month tour. Meanwhile, in the future, Ava accepts help from a handsome childminder. With Jane's help, Bonington is quickly located, facing a magistrate for breaching the peace. Dominick successfully defends his fellow time traveller by pretending they belong to a religious order. Later, Dominick and Jane have a disastrous romantic evening that grows far worse when the impulsive Bonington dies whilst trying to rescue a kidnap victim he had accidentally encountered earlier. Returning sadly to the future, Dominick conceals from Ava that he has visited Jane again. Caleb allows Dominick to return to the same date and try and change the past. This time Bonington is saved and successfully returned in Dominick's saucer because his own time machine has been confiscated by the authorities. Dominick also tries to fix his aborted dinner date with Jane, but they still end up having a fight, Jane furious that he has manipulated her with time travel. Ava questions Caleb over Dominick's recent behaviour. Reluctantly, Jane agrees to help Dominick find the missing saucer, which turns out to be in the barn of a sympathetic scientist called Professor Burrows. With the professor's help, Dominick manages to repair and launch the time machine just before the military arrive. Back in his own time, Dominick returns to an empty house, Ava having taken their sons to her mother's, feeling betrayed by his deception. After confronting Caleb over his manipulations, Dominick makes one final trip back to the past to see Jane and his son greeting her returning boyfriend at the airport. Eventually, he and Ava are reconciled. The play ends with Jane filming their son playing on the beach, whilst in the future, Dominick symbolically deletes that same treasured recording, happy that he knows exactly where he should be.
There's some nice little bits at the end about, the dangers of knowing the future, or like what is mentioned earlier about inventing something before its time and all that. So, there's some, I think we travel more heavily into some of the more normal concepts of sci-fi, but it's a really, really well done piece. They've not tried to overdo it with, what they had the first one, and they've not sort of thought, oh, it's successful, let's go bigger. They've kept it grounded, and they've kept the characters faithful to what they are, But as Tim alluded to, you do get a bit more conflict in Dominick's life, in the future when Ava actually leaves him. It seemed to be vaguely engineered by Caleb in some ways. And
he's setting her up with the home help. He's a dirty old man.
And that is sort of, I don't know if that's Caleb just reassessing his dominance, saying, yeah, I've been I've given you a bit of leeway, but just remember who's in charge, Sort of, he's the puppet master, and he can pull any strings he wants, as it were. But I think it all satisfactorily winds up quite nicely, He's got to see his son in the past. Jane is happy with her new beau, and her new beau is a rock star in the future as well. So what could be more fantastic than that?
Yeah, again, it was a worthy follow-up and just moved everything forward. Chaz's point about it staying quite grounded and not trying to get too highfalutin was a good one. I jotted down a lot of quite random observations as I watched it. So I'll just I'll dip into those. But so it's like this time Ava is played as jealous more explicitly, and as I said before, I think later on in the second one it does pivot around she directly says, "Did you go and see Jane?" He says, "No, it's a lie." He lies, and that's then explored a bit. And it's interesting to me. I'm not entirely clear what Dominick's impetus is for that lie, whether he's just trying to sort of keep things simple, or his mind's full of all the kind of ongoing issues with Bonington and so on. But it's definitely not a lie that goes unfollowed through, because obviously Ava does go away with the childminder. Now, I want to talk about this childminder because when he walks into the kind of flat I'm like, the childminder's a hottie. There's a problem here. And he's a jumbler, but he teaches her to jiggle. And, I was like, I bet he teaches her to jiggle. So again, they're playing with the language, but and it's all very gentle and genteel almost. There's that kind of quite placid, futury way of being and way of dealing with relationships, which has sort of stayed true into the second one. But I think that's a really interesting plot, especially because it then comes through in the way that Great Aunt Mabel gets involved in arguing that Ava should return to Dominick. And there's this line about can only fool with her, but he can dance with you. He could probably dance with Jane as well, but it would have to be dorky future dancing, right? So, but yeah, what else is going on? That poor busker, he kind of upstages a past busker, get himself some peas to go on the train with, and
Dominick sort of like does something in an innocent sort of way, but sort of ruins that guy's day.
Talk about damage to the past. This guy could have gone on to.
That guy was going to invent a whole new form of prog rock.
Yeah, has he saved the future or ruined it? Who don't know. Well, talking of musical taste, I think I vehemently disagree with Dominick when he asserts that the music of 1982 should be preserved for the future, or at least those particular choices. Because after the producers and I both simultaneously got fed up with "You Better Believe It, Babe," we switched to Jane's boyfriend's song, which seems to be called "Who's Selling Dreams," although it morphed in my head after the 10th time into "Who's Salad Cream." Who's salad cream? Who's salad cream? Who's salad cream?
Yeah, they are a bit of a sort of Blandy Eagles sort of easy listening.
I think it's the same composer, I believe, from the credits, but a different act performing them. But no, the court scene is very interesting because that's where he gets the big payoff one more time from looking vaguely like he's a religious figure. And he does that very cute thing when he's called to the stand of lifting his legs over the rail and sliding down the banister on his way to the stand. I don't quite buy that you'd get away with that, religious man or not. But, there's gentle comedy in how he kind of navigates to get Bonington out of trouble.
Yeah, I mean, the magistrate is, she's sort of, you can just see she's like, I just don't want to be here today. Yeah. And this guy, she can't really get annoyed at him. Like, he's frustrating the hell out of her.
Yeah.
Like you said, the comedy is played, and it's played quite well. I don't think they strayed from their original ideas, so they kept the characters the same in a lot of ways, but moved the plot on, and that was nice. It's also nice to see that. I mean, this was 1982, yeah. So basically, about 15 years later, Morris Gamm and Lawrence Marks, re-evaluated it and made it into Goodnight Sweetheart. And just but no, I mean it's particularly nice. There's some great little scenes, and as you say, the jiggler or juggler or whatever. I mean, yeah, he reminded me of the guy that used to do finger bobs.
It's quite children's TV, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yes, there's a bit of sort of Joshy about him.
Yeah. I notice we're not quite enlightened enough in the future that we can't let a male nanny be a full-time job, so he has to have another job. That's a slightly disappointing subtext.
I'm not being funny, but he's, I think he's a male nanny and a juggler. So, I think that's pretty different for, say, your normal employment path for most males in 1982. So
his next career was clearly in entertainment. But no, there's a few things that rankled actually, or stuck out a bit. So I didn't really buy why Dominic would sit around watching Jane's boyfriend on Top of the Pops when Bonington's missing. There's no urgency there at all at that point. And Bonington's clearly kind of lusting after Pilar the moment they meet. So he's off with Pilar. I think, there could be another grandfather paradox in the making that very night,
Yeah, I think that sort of turns out to be a red herring. Oh no, history's going to repeat itself. But and then they just kind of let that thread drop. A deliberate misdirection rather than sloppy writing.
Because clearly Pilar's not as naive as she seems, thankfully.
Yeah, she's a way to make the rice.
But is that a Pilar rice joke?
Yeah.
Oh my God!
It's a bit disturbing when he died. When Dominic went to find him, and he seemed to think he was going to rescue a princess or something, and basically fell off the ledge and died. And I was like, oh wow. So, but obviously, yeah, he can go back. But then again, that they're obviously not want to complicate time travel too much. But if he goes back, surely he's there as well. It gets messy again.
Yeah, they're still trying to keep the. I mean, it is a bit more science fiction in the second one, but yeah, they're trying to keep it simple. I mean, it's interesting that there doesn't seem to be any physical laws. You can go back and change time. There's nothing stopping you. It's only a moral argument.
He goes back a little bit further so that he can have that conversation again with Jane and not have an. And his own hubris ends up sort of, they have the argument he tried to avoid. But what was also interesting, that the first time they had the argument, it was about the fact that he felt bad for Jane's boyfriend. It wasn't the fact that obviously he knew he existed, but it was lying to him,
Again, it's about the honesty and the lying.
Yeah, the honesty. That's
disturbed by Jane lying too. And so it goes back in time.
Jane's point of view, that would have just got far too complicated. So,
but this, you notice, the argument, as you say, deterministically happens all over again, which is a nice touch. But this time, at least, Pilar didn't get hit in the face by whatever gets thrown.
I thought she did.
I think she was supposed to, but the shot's slightly different.
Got hit by something.
Hit in the face the first time, and then it just missed her face the second time.
Right. Oh, okay.
But yeah,
see, I wasn't paying enough attention. It was a bit crap. She walks in and gets it bashing.
I know, poor Pilar. I bet you wish she'd stayed with Bonington after all. But so there's a couple of other things. Like, here's one humorous one. So Dominic's horrified by the smokers in the past, but how come when he goes forward to see Caleb and Caleb's puffing away in a pipe, how come he's not snatching that out of Caleb's hand? Maybe tobacco's harmless in the future.
Yeah.
It could be that. I
think this is an example of the design disconnecting from the story, because Caleb is like a weird old mystic and basically is Gandalf, so he has to be. The one big continuity difference, which, unless I missed an explanation, let me know, was in the first film, you bring the rose into the future, but you open the box and the rose crumbles to dust. But in the second film, he's quite happily bringing forward bottles of wine and they're drinking them.
Wine ages well. A rose is an organic thing.
So you literally just think that this is wine.
That would come to dust. A bottle would take longer for that to happen, and the contents would be protected because it's sealed.
It'd be a good way of sealing the wine market as well. It's like it's 400 years old, mate.
It still tastes like bloody Happy Shopper.
No, I should buy that.
Happy Shopper.
That's very good. Very good.
That Black Tower travels well.
Couple of other things. So, by the middle of it, I wrote down that now that Jane's boyfriend's band have supplanted the Somewhere Islands guy, I'm almost missing it. Almost. But it is Yeah, it is almost like the producers got fed up with the first track at exactly the same point I did, because suddenly it's all that second track. When they go to in the third act, if you like, they go to the farm, and Jane's clearly not a country girl. She leaves the gate wide open at the dorky farm of boffins. But we have a boffin who is the toy maker.
Yay, Michael Gough, who's I was really pleased to see him, because I mean, he wouldn't thank me for calling him one of the great cult actors, but he is, and it was great to see him as well as his seeing Patrick McGee.
And it's a lovely role. He's clearly having great fun with it, and I think it's a lovely resolution as well, that we're going all X-Files with the government cars coming, and the boffin's just so entranced by learning the truth of things that, again, that kind of joyful interpretation of people's reactions to Dominic, who helps him escape.
It's like scenes you seem to get in Edge of Darkness or Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It's evocative of that era, you know, where you get that explanation of things, and when they're talking. It also reminds me of scene in Survivors where Abby Grant goes to pick up her son from the school, and there's the old teacher there who's like keeping the radio, and he's explaining that, you know, about you know, yes, there'll be axes in the shop, but what happens when the last axe head breaks? Who's going to, you know, smelt the metal and stuff? And it's a sort of vague summarizing or getting the plot, you know, sort of giving the audience a bit of exposition, I suppose, but in a really sort of well done way. Maybe I'm just playing again, but it's sort of that's where it takes me. But Tim will tell you the places conversations take me are strange and bizarre,
dark and scary. I'd scribbled down that when the saucer lifts off from the farm, Jane's rather got the look of someone who's regretting being helpful. It's just like, oh no. But also, I was wrong about Siri offering Dominic porn earlier. It's she offers him music, dancing, or girls. And that's when they have that amazing facial reaction to, and he's like, "Oh, Sue," or whoever. That's great. So it resolves with a final visit to the airport, where we see Jane in the distance and waiting for her Duncan, his name is, I think, coming back from his tour. And he gets off the plane with his giant teddy bear and his guitar and stuff, and they're driving off, and the teddy bear's in the back seat. And I swear the teddy bear is giving Dominic the stink eye out of the back seat. Look at the shot again; it's hilarious. But now there's a lovely attempt at a matching shot between Dominic alone at the airport and being back home. It doesn't quite line up, but it's a lovely visual idea. And then he's back home and he's playing this videotape that he made. He's showing it to Ava. And again, there's that thing of the honesty. He deletes the tape. Although it did cross my dirty mind that maybe he's deleting it before they got to the home movie part of the tape.
So he's sort of demystifying. Because no doubt Ava has built up a picture in her head about what and she gets to see her, oh, she's, you know, a normal woman.
I was just going to say, this is not relevant to that, but another nice little touch I noticed in both of them was when they're on the beach, you know, Dominic and Ava and the child, they're wearing UV protection suits, you know, like bathing or whatever, because my aunt used to bring them back from Australia because they were like quite prevalent there, but not over here. And I just thought it was interesting because there was that whole thing about the ozone layer, especially in the 80s. There was a big, you know, we're destroying the ozone layer, and obviously the UV stuff in the future is, as a result, you know, sort of being careful. So I thought little touches like that, they're very subtle, but again, it's very clever, you know. This is what I really like about it, you know, the attention to detail in it.
They got this trick shot at the end of the first film with the two couples on the beach with the children, or rather Jane and the kid, and then Dominic and Ava and their kid. And that was a lovely reveal. It was really delightful. And this time they do a nice trick where you've got a shot of a kid with the flying saucer toy, but it turns out to be in the past. And my theory here,
Mm.
my headcanon, is that the Michael Gough's Boffin character, having lost the government contract, he's gone into merch. I noticed a couple of names in the credit that I knew from elsewhere. So Dick Mills on sound, obviously, did a lot of Doctor Who, but Peter Ragg, who worked on Red Dwarf.
Well, Doctor Who fans might mention, might notice Dorka Nerezdik, who's the makeup artist, and has appeared in articles in Doctor Who magazine about how she did a special makeup on Doctor Who. Does an excellent job on this one. In fact, this ties in with the kind of restraint and the lovely balancing act that Alan Gibson and Jeremy Paul do in both plays, is that there's no need for a third play. And they were very sensible. The whole thing, that they form very nicely a nice pair of stories. And by the time you get to the end of another flip, it feels a very organic place to leave it.
Shot that video, which started it all up at the first place.
This is the relic that great Annie Mavis had seen, is it? Have Big Finish got involved? That's my next question. I would enjoy maybe more, a little more of the world of the future. But again, it's more of that kind of completist fill in the gaps impulse than anything that's necessarily for the main story.
Yeah. I think
so the Dominick Hide Marvel Cinematic Universe, that's what I'm wishing.
They could explore the future area a bit if they wanted to. It would have been a way of maybe doing it without tainting the original source. But
Maybe wanting more, they always say.
I think it sets it up so well that even the stuff we don't necessarily know about the future, you're quite satisfied with the whole production by the end. I don't mean it doesn't leave you wanting more, but you're satisfied and you feel as if you've been told a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, rather than, something hastily, put together.
No, for sure, because I think it's always your imagination will fill in gaps with probably more aplomb than another production would.
It certainly stays, with you. As I say, I watched that originally. It stayed with me. It wasn't, again, like you said, Gareth, it wasn't till about the 90s that I managed to get hold of it. And that was a magical time, getting hold of all these things that you had remembered, or.
Here's a question. So we grew up in the era before home video and so on. So you would watch something like that with no expectation. It wasn't even a concept that you might ever see it again unless they repeated it maybe once. And so I think there's this kind of 10-year period since our kind of childhoods in the 70s, 80s, where, stuff was just ephemeral and that was that. And then home video suddenly awakens all of this possibility, and network comes to fill in all the gaps. But
you've seen my shelves.
Well, yeah, groaning at the seams. But I'm really interested in that because it does fundamentally change your attitude towards something. This passed me by the first time, and I would have never expected to see it again until suddenly you could.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by TV you've watched and you suddenly get to see. It's like that documentary on Revenge of the Cybermen, Checks, Lies, and Videotape.
Yeah.
That, I think, is the best, documentary that's been done for any of the Doctor Who DVDs, because it captures that period where you were getting those pirate copies of the 10th Planet or the Keys of Marinus or something. It was, some ways, I remember my first copy was really ropey, but it didn't matter because it was like, this is fascinating getting to see this again.
Yeah. You were talking about the power of nostalgia at the start, Gareth.
Because for one, I never thought I would see that, but even things like, say, Robot or Carnival of Monsters, apart from the odd repeat, this is fascinating, to have this. And there is a sort of a sort of rose-tintedness of that era where you were maybe getting a little drip-fed stuff, and now shelves are groaning with DVDs, blah, blah, blah. And I often find myself thinking, oh, I think I'll watch the Champions tonight. And then, oh no, leave it. And then end up going on YouTube. Because you just can't think of, you just can't decide what to watch.
It's
so
a long list on your bookshelf as well. So
you are overspoiled sometimes with it,
I think that's a very good point. I think, we are in that generation who, for a while, it was just these tantalising photographs in books of magazines. I have to say, we were, I think, quite nicely and naturally running into a kind of wrapping up final thoughts there.
Yeah, thank you. I just love them, and I'm grateful to you and Chaz for coaxing me into watching them after all this time. Other people in the past who've mentioned them, I've always talked of them very fondly, and yeah, they're just great. Well made, well performed, really thought provoking, enjoyable, funny. Just really, really lovely bit of television history there.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I agree. I'm really sort of enjoying dipping into some random stuff. Oh God, plugging everything again. I'm really enjoying, plugging into these sort of things like Dominick Hide, or like we do Box of Delights, and stuff you wouldn't necessarily, say, right, we're going to do a podcast about this, which is why I like your format where you take something, something quite obscure sometimes, and talk about it for about an hour or so. And it's a fascinating thing, even if it's something we don't necessarily enjoy that much. There's still
You're talking about Kindig now, aren't you?
But there's still a fascination to it, a fascination of how it came about, how it was received, etc.
Why nobody stopped it before it was too late.
But it's like when you did your Star Cops one, because I'm a big fan of Star Cops and stuff. But I do like this sort of dipping into something where you go, oh yeah, I watched that, I remember that. It's like our friend John texted me when he heard that we were doing for our podcast. Our next one is going to be King of the Castle. And that like myself. So that it stirs up these memories. So no, thank you so much for inviting us on for this one, because this is a particular joy, this one. But it was nice, it was really nice to sort of watch it again and sort of assess it and appreciate it a little more.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for taking the time to watch them and coming on to talk about Dominick. I can't really add anything to what you said, because I kind of agree with it. I think they're just beautifully written and made examples of mainstream science fiction, and they're like a fine meal. It's just everything's in the right proportions.
Well, a fine happy shopper wine that's been
brought into. I meant to tell you, Chaz, when you lent me the DVD, I opened the box and it crumbled to dust. Sorry, mate.
What can you do?
Well, I'm in a different time zone to you both. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you are.
Actually, you're in the future. I'm in the past.
Yeah, this is technically this is an international podcast,
literally.
The two plays were released in a VHS double pack in 1991 and then on DVD in 2005, accompanied by a booklet written by Andrew Pixley, which has been invaluable in the preparation of this podcast. The script for The Flipside of Dominick Hide was published in a collection, Intensive Care and Other TV Plays, edited by Michael Church. So before we wrap up, I would be remiss if I didn't give another plug for the Randomiser podcast, which is funny and erudite and great to listen to. Is there anything you'd like to particularly plug? You've mentioned the Box of Delights.
Well, that's a random dip into old TV shows that we've been doing for a few episodes now. We also randomly select an episode of Doctor Who each time using the wonderful randomiser.net website, and then go away and rewatch that. And yeah, we just sort of chat about whatever we've been up to in any Doctor Who news that's broken, which obviously was particularly fertile territory in recent weeks. But when there's a new Doctor Who, we tend to follow along episode by episode with that. It's anchor.fm/randomiser with an S, Jazz.
Not a Z.
There we go.
That's our catchphrase.
Yeah, and that's our kind of. I also, that's our podcast. I also run a Twitter account called Doctor Who AI Art, which is at Doctor Who AI Art, and basically just posts Doctor Who AI art. Who'd have thought it? And that's always good fun. I noticed there's been an account using the I think it's called Wall-E2, which is another AI art generator, and they've been doing some Doctor Who stories which look amazing. It's one of those ones that you just type in natural language, like penguin on a bonfire, and it goes and searches that out. Apologies to any penguins out there.
And if anybody wants to follow me on Twitter, that's at genius with about 5 or 6 S's. You'll work.
There's a guy with more or less S's than you. They're going to be getting an awful lot on you.
Yeah, you can just imagine this guy going, "What? What's the chatter?"
Well, there will be links in the details accompanying this podcast. So it only remains for me to say thank you very much for listening, and it's goodbye from
me, Charles Auchterlonie, and goodbye from...
I must be Tim Reid then.
You must.
Thank you, and speak to you again soon. Very British Futures is hosted and produced by Gareth Preston. Music by Chattery Art. If you'd like to find out more or get in touch, please visit our Facebook page, use the link in the podcast description to our website, follow us on Twitter at FuturesVery, or email us at this address, Very British Futures Podcast, one word, at gmail.com.